NCIS fans, the show just shared a major announcement about Rocky Carroll. NCIS fans woke up to a wave of excitement after the show's team dropped a major announcement centered on Rocky Carroll, the longtime cast member who has quietly become one of the series' most stabilizing forces. For over a decade, Carroll has embodied the role of NCIS director Leon Vance, a character defined by authority, restraint, and an unshakable sense of duty. Now, with this new update, it feels like the series is deliberately drawing attention back to one of its most enduring figures and possibly signaling something bigger for the future of the show. At a time when NCIS continues to evolve through cast shifts, new story arcs, and expanding spin offs, announcements like this don't land as routine publicity. They feel like narrative signals. And for fans who have followed the series for years, any mention of Rocky Carroll carries weight because his character is deeply tied to the backbone of the NCIS world: leadership, continuity, and the quiet pressure of command decisions that ripple across every case. The announcement itself, while carefully framed, focused on Carroll's continued presence and expanded involvement in upcoming storylines. That alone sparked immediate discussion among fans. After all, in a show known for rotating characters in and out of its central team, stability is rare. Carroll's Leon Vance has been one of the few constants since his introduction, stepping into leadership after earlier shakeups within NCIS headquarters. His presence has often been the calm center in the storm of investigations, political pressure, and personal losses that define the series. What makes this moment particularly interesting is how NCIS has been leaning into legacy storytelling. Recent seasons have not only explored new cases, but also revisited emotional threads from earlier years: losses, betrayals, and the consequences of decisions made at the highest levels of law enforcement. Vance, as portrayed by Rocky Carroll, has been central to many of those arcs. He is not just a boss in an office, he is a man constantly balancing institutional responsibility with deeply personal sacrifice. Fans reacting online immediately began speculating about what this announcement could mean. Some believe it signals a larger role for Vance in the final stretch of the current season. Others wonder whether it might connect to a major turning point in leadership at NCIS, especially given how the series has previously written out or elevated directors under dramatic circumstances. The memory of past leadership transitions still lingers in the show's history, and viewers are always alert when authority figures are mentioned in promotional material. But beyond speculation, there is also a sense of appreciation. Rocky Carroll's performance has often been described as understated but essential. Unlike the more action-driven members of the NCIS team, Vance operates in rooms where decisions are made rather than crime scenes where evidence is collected. That contrast has always given the character a unique narrative weight. He represents consequence. He represents the chain of command that rarely gets credit, but always absorbs the fallout. In many ways, Carroll's portrayal has helped shape the modern identity of NCIS. When he first appeared, Vance was positioned as a figure of skepticism, someone who questioned the team's methods and challenged long-standing dynamics. Over time, that skepticism evolved into mutual respect and eventually into trust. That transformation mirrored the show's own evolution as NCIS moved from a purely procedural format into a more character-driven ensemble drama. The announcement also highlights something fans don't always consciously acknowledge: how rare it is for a supporting authority character to remain so central for so long. Many shows cycle through leadership roles to refresh conflict or introduce new dynamics. NCIS, however, has kept Vance in place long enough for him to become part of the institution itself. He is no longer just a character within the building, he feels like part of the building. That permanence is part of what makes this news resonate. It suggests that the creators still see value in continuity, even as they introduce new faces and spin-off expansions. And in a franchise that has grown into multiple interconnected series, stability in one anchor character helps maintain narrative cohesion across the entire universe. Of course, no NCIS announcement comes without emotional undercurrents. The series has never been afraid to put its characters through significant personal and professional trials. Directors, agents, and analysts alike have all faced moments where duty and humanity collide in difficult ways. Vance himself has not been immune to that pattern. His storylines often carry a quiet emotional weight, family struggles, leadership burdens, and the psychological toll of being responsible for decisions that affect lives both inside and outside the agency. That is why fans are reading between the lines of this announcement. In NCIS storytelling, emphasis is rarely accidental. When a character is highlighted publicly, it often hints at narrative movement ahead. Whether that means increased screen time, a pivotal storyline, or even a long anticipated resolution to a personal arc, viewers are preparing themselves for impact. Still, there is also optimism. Rocky Carroll's continued involvement suggests that NCIS is not looking to phase out its foundational leadership anytime soon. Instead, it may be reinforcing the idea that experience matters, that in a world of evolving threats and shifting team dynamics, some figures remain essential anchors. And that brings us back to why this announcement matters beyond simple casting news. It's about trust, both within the story and between the show and its audience. Over more than 2 decades, NCIS has built a relationship with viewers who return not just for cases, but for the characters who solve them. Leon Vance, as portrayed by Rocky Carroll, represents a promise that some elements of the show remain steady even as everything else changes. As fans continue to discuss and dissect the announcement, one thing is clear: attention is firmly back on the leadership of NCIS. Whether this leads to a major storyline shift, a deeper character exploration, or simply a reaffirmation of Carroll's role in the series, the message has already landed. In a franchise built on investigation, perhaps the most intriguing case right now is not on the screen, but in what comes next for the people running the agency. And at the center of that question stands Rocky Carroll, still quietly shaping the tone of NCIS from behind the director's desk, just as he has for years. The reaction to the announcement didn't settle quickly. If anything, it intensified as NCIS fans began revisiting older episodes featuring Rocky Carroll, almost as if they were trying to trace the path that led director Leon Vance to this renewed spotlight. Social media threads filled with clips of his earliest appearances, moments of tense decision making in the director's office, and quieter scenes that revealed the emotional weight behind his composed exterior. What stands out, especially in hindsight, is how deliberately the character was built to contrast with the more field driven energy of agents like Gibbs, DiNozzo, and later the evolving team under new leadership. Vance was never designed to compete with them in action or humor. Instead, he functioned as the narrative pressure point, the one who had to answer for everything that happened beyond the glass walls of headquarters. That structural role is part of why this announcement feels significant. It isn't just about an actor staying on a show. It's about reaffirming a storytelling framework that has defined NCIS for years: the balance between fieldwork chaos and administrative consequence. Without Vance, that balance tilts. And the series has always relied on that equilibrium to keep its world believable. Inside the fan community, a different kind of speculation has also emerged, one less about departure and more about evolution. Some viewers believe the announcement hints at a deeper exploration of Vance's past, something the series has occasionally touched but never fully unpacked. His history in intelligence operations, his guarded personal life, and the emotional boundaries he maintains have always felt like pieces of a larger story waiting to be told. Others interpret it through a more structural lens, with NCIS expanding its universe through multiple interconnected storylines and spin offs. The role of a central authority figure becomes even more important. Someone has to anchor the broader narrative architecture, especially when agents cross over between cases, jurisdictions, and even series. In that sense, keeping Rocky Carroll in a prominent position is not just character continuity, it's franchise stability. Behind the scenes, long running productions often rely on exactly that kind of consistency. While audiences focus on action and plot twists, the internal logic of a series depends heavily on characters who can bridge seasons without needing constant reinvention. Vance has fulfilled that role for years, quietly absorbing the changes around him while maintaining a sense of institutional identity. What makes Carroll's performance effective is its restraint. He doesn't dominate scenes, he controls them. A slight shift in tone, a pause before responding to bad news, or a controlled expression of frustration often communicates more than dialogue ever could. That understated presence is part of why fans react so strongly when he is placed in the spotlight. It feels rare, almost like the show is deliberately stepping back to say, pay attention to this moment. And now, with renewed focus on his character, that sense of anticipation is building again. There is also the emotional layer that NCIS has developed over time. Leadership in this universe is never just procedural, it is personal. Every decision carries consequences that extend beyond the office, and Vance has been one of the clearest examples of that burden. Whether dealing with internal crises or external threats, he often stands at the intersection of policy and humanity, forced to choose between what is efficient and what is right. That tension has always made him one of the more quietly compelling figures in the series. He is not written as infallible, nor is he positioned as detached. Instead, he exists in a constant state of controlled responsibility, where mistakes are not just professional risks, but emotional weights he carries forward. As discussions continue, one theory gaining traction is that this announcement could be preparing viewers for a major leadership centered storyline. Not necessarily a departure, but a test of authority, one that pushes Vance into a situation where the entire structure of NCIS is challenged. The show has done similar arcs before, but rarely with Vance at the center of the storm. If that is the direction ahead, then the renewed attention makes perfect sense. It is not just about reminding viewers he exists. It is about positioning him where the stakes are highest. Still, nothing is confirmed, and that ambiguity is part of what keeps the conversation alive. NCIS has always been careful with how it reveals long-term narrative plans, preferring to let tension build rather than resolve early speculation. And in this case, that strategy is working exactly as intended. For now, what remains clear is that Rocky Carroll's presence continues to be more than just consistent, it is foundational. As NCIS moves forward into its next phase, whatever that may be, the role of Leon Vance feels less like a supporting piece and more like a stabilizing force in a constantly shifting world. And that is why this announcement matters. Not because it changes everything immediately, but because it quietly confirms something fans have sensed for a long time. Even in a series defined by change, some pillars are meant to remain standing. As the conversation around Rocky Carroll's announcement continued to grow, NCIS itself seemed to lean into the moment with a kind of quiet confidence. Not through loud teasers or dramatic previews, but through carefully placed storytelling choices that reminded viewers just how deeply embedded Leon Vance has become in the fabric of NCIS. In recent episodes, fans noticed something subtle but deliberate. Vance was being given more narrative breathing room. Scenes that might once have focused purely on field operations now cut briefly back to headquarters, where the director's perspective added context to every unfolding crisis. It wasn't a reinvention of the character, it was a recentering. And for longtime viewers, that shift felt intentional. That's what makes this moment so interesting. NCIS has always balanced its ensemble storytelling carefully, but it rarely signals when it is strengthening a particular pillar. Instead, it lets the audience feel it gradually. And right now, all signs suggest that Rocky Carroll's presence is being positioned not just as consistent, but increasingly pivotal. Part of the reason this resonates so strongly is because Vance has always represented a different kind of leadership. He is not a field agent chasing suspects or improvising under fire. He is the person who has to absorb the aftermath. When operations go wrong, when intelligence is incomplete, when political pressure mounts, he is the one sitting in the room where consequences are assigned and defended. That structural role has become even more important as NCIS has expanded its storytelling universe. With multiple spin offs and interconnected narratives, the franchise increasingly relies on characters who can function as connective tissue between different teams and agencies. Vance, as portrayed by Rocky Carroll, naturally fits that role. He is one of the few characters who can logically appear across storylines without breaking the internal logic of the world. But beyond structure, there is also tone. Vance brings a level of grounded realism that helps keep this series anchored. When other characters operate in high energy investigative mode, he slows the rhythm down. He forces the narrative to acknowledge consequences, not just outcomes. That balance is part of why his presence matters even in scenes where he isn't physically dominant. Fans discussing the announcement have also pointed out something else: timing. NCIS is at a stage in its long run where legacy matters more than ever. Characters introduced in earlier seasons are now part of the show's historical foundation, and their arcs carry cumulative weight. Every decision about their future feels less like a simple casting update and more like a statement about what the series values going forward. In that sense, the attention on Rocky Carroll feels like more than promotion, it feels like reaffirmation. A reminder that while the show continues to evolve, it is still anchored by figures who have been shaping its identity for years. There is also an emotional dimension that can't be ignored. Vance's journey has never been about spectacle, it has been about endurance. He has survived institutional change, personal loss, and constant operational pressure, all while maintaining a composed exterior that rarely fully reveals what he is carrying internally. That emotional restraint has made him one of the more complex figures in the NCIS hierarchy. And complexity is exactly what long running series depend on. Without it, leadership roles become static. With it, they become storytelling engines. This is why speculation continues to swirl about what might come next. Some viewers believe the announcement hints at a major test of authority, something that forces Vance into a position where his leadership is challenged in ways the series hasn't explored before. Others think it may lead to a more introspective arc, possibly revealing more about his personal history or decision making philosophy. There is even quiet discussion about whether NCIS might use Vance as a bridge between different branches of its expanding universe, appearing in crossover events that tie together multiple teams under a single narrative crisis. It's not confirmed, but it's the kind of possibility that fits naturally within the structure the show has built over time. What is clear, however, is that Rocky Carroll's role remains far from static. The announcement didn't feel like a closing chapter, it felt like a repositioning. A signal that the character still has narrative space to occupy and perhaps even new dimensions to explore. And for a series as long running and carefully constructed as NCIS, that kind of stability is not just useful, it is essential. Because at its core, NCIS has never just been about solving cases. It has always been about the people responsible for making sure those cases don't unravel the system itself. And in that structure, Leon Vance remains one of the most important figures holding everything together. So, as fans continue to analyze every detail of the announcement, one thing stands out more than anything else. This is not just about what has been said, it is about what is still coming. And for Rocky Carroll's character, that future now feels more present than ever. As the conversation around Rocky Carroll's announcement kept expanding, something interesting began happening within the NCIS fandom. The focus slowly shifted from what the announcement meant to what it protects. In other words, instead of asking whether Leon Vance would change, viewers started asking what would be lost if he ever did. That question sits at the heart of why this moment matters so much for NCIS. Long running procedural dramas don't survive on cases alone. They survive on institutional memory, the sense that the world inside the show has weight, history, and consequences that carry forward. Vance is one of the rare characters who embodies that continuity without needing constant reinvention. And that continuity has become more valuable as the series itself continues to evolve. In earlier seasons, NCIS was often defined by its field driven rhythm: investigation, pursuit, resolution, and a brief emotional coda. But over time, especially as the ensemble expanded and the narrative universe widened, the structure began to shift. Leadership became more central. Decisions made off the field began to matter just as much as the action on it. That is where Vance became indispensable. Rocky Carroll's portrayal of the character is built on controlled tension. He rarely overstates emotion, but he never appears emotionally absent either. Instead, he operates in a space where everything is contained: pressure, grief, responsibility, and authority all compressed into brief, carefully chosen moments. That restraint is what gives the character weight. And now, with renewed attention on him, that weight feels even more pronounced. Behind the scenes of long running series like NCIS, character longevity is never accidental. It is the result of narrative utility. Characters remain because they solve structural problems in storytelling. Vance solves a very specific one. He makes the consequences of fieldwork visible. Without him, the show would risk becoming purely reactive agents responding to crises without a consistent institutional voice shaping the aftermath. That is why fans are reading the announcement not as a simple update, but as a reinforcement of narrative architecture. There is also a growing appreciation for how Vance has evolved without losing his core identity. Early in his tenure, he was often positioned as a corrective force, someone who challenged established methods and questioned whether tradition was always the best approach. That created friction with the existing team structure at the time. But over the years, that friction softened into something more complex, mutual respect built through shared crises. That evolution mirrors one of NCIS's broader strengths. The show doesn't reset its characters, it accumulates them. And accumulation brings depth. One of the most discussed aspects of Rocky Carroll's role is how rarely the show overexposes him. Vance appears when the story needs scale. He appears when decisions need institutional gravity. He appears when the stakes extend beyond individual cases and into the framework of federal responsibility. That selective visibility makes his presence more impactful. So when an announcement highlights him, it doesn't feel routine. It feels intentional. Some fans have begun to interpret this renewed focus as a setup for a larger thematic arc about leadership under pressure. Not just operational pressure, but philosophical pressure, what it means to lead an agency where every decision has moral, political, and personal consequences. NCIS has explored pieces of this before, but rarely with Vance as the central figure in that exploration. If that is the direction being built toward, then the announcement makes even more sense. It repositions attention toward the person who would naturally carry that storyline. But there is another layer to consider: legacy. In long running television, legacy characters serve a dual purpose. Within the story, they provide continuity. Outside the story, they provide emotional grounding for audiences who have invested years into the world. Vance is now firmly in that category. He is not just part of NCIS history, he is part of the viewer's history with the show. That is why reactions feel so personal. For many fans, Rocky Carroll's presence is associated with entire eras of the series. Changes around his character don't just signal narrative shifts, they signal time passing. And time is something NCIS has always handled carefully. It is a show built on procedural repetition, but emotional progression. Cases reset each episode, but characters do not. They carry forward everything that has happened before, even when it is not explicitly referenced. That structure makes stability rare and valuable, which is why this announcement carries more weight than it might appear to at first glance. It is not introducing something new, it is reinforcing something essential. At the same time, there is an undercurrent of anticipation that cannot be ignored. NCIS rarely highlights a character without intention. Whether it leads to a major leadership storyline, a cross-agency crisis, or a personal arc that reshapes how Vance is viewed within the organization, fans are expecting movement. And expectation itself becomes part of the viewing experience. Because now every scene involving Vance carries additional context. Every meeting in his office feels slightly more significant. Every decision he makes feels like it might be building towards something larger. That is the quiet effect of strategic storytelling emphasis. It changes how audiences interpret even routine moments. Still, beneath all speculation, one fact remains steady: Rocky Carroll continues to be one of the most reliable anchors in NCIS. His performance gives the series a sense of institutional reality that few other characters can match. And in a show that thrives on balancing personal drama with procedural structure, that kind of stability is not just useful, it is essential to its identity. So, as fans continue to analyze what the announcement might mean for the future, the most grounded interpretation may also be the simplest. NCIS is not signaling an ending, it is reaffirming a foundation. And in that foundation Leon Vance still stands exactly where he has stood for years, not in the center of every storm, but in the place where storms are measured, managed, and ultimately understood.